Today is a bit of a different day. Today is a special day. Today is my 35th birthday. Yes, 35. I feel like I just turned 30 yesterday, so that is really weird coming out of my mouth. But I thought it would be fun to celebrate with you guys and talk about 35 books, one for each year of my life, and how they have impacted me and are special to me. So I hope that you're going to enjoy this, and let's get into it. Hi guys, it's Amy and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I hope that you're doing well. Let me know how you're doing in the comments. And yes, it is my birthday. We kind of celebrated over the weekend, my husband and I, just, doing some bookish things, good food, that kind of stuff. But today, on the actual day of my birthday, somehow it just lined up perfectly for this. I thought it'd be fun to talk about books that are significant to me, have been special to me throughout my life with you guys. And I definitely want to know books that have been special to you throughout your life, maybe one from your childhood or one that you've read recently that has really impacted you. And the books on this list could be ones that are just were there at the right time, even if they aren't necessarily like super deep and emotionally impactful or anything like that, but they just represent a certain time in my life, or me learning something new, or having some kind of like emotional experience within myself. So I believe you guys are going to enjoy this. Hopefully you do as much as I will enjoy it. And yeah, let's go down a little bit of memory lane. My first book goes way, way back on my timeline, probably from when I was like a toddler, 3 or 4 years old, and that is Corduroy. And this is just a cute like picture book about a teddy bear that loses his button. He gets lost in a shopping mall, and how his owner finds him again. But this is special to me because it was probably one of the first books that I read on my own, like picture book with text, but also it was a book that I lost along with all of my other books. When I was about in 8th grade, there was a Hurricane Ivan in like 2005, and we were flooded. We lost our home. So I lost a a good bit of like my childhood things, including childhood books. So I've been slowly collecting them again just over the years. And I found this one in a used bookstore in the last town that we lived in, and it was just in such great condition, so I needed to have it on my shelf. But this just reminds me that books have always been a part of my life, and they're very special to me. And so being able to like kind of reclaim that and find these books again has been a really special experience, being able to get those memories back. I'm sorry if that was a sad note to start on, but for me it is a good thing being able to like find these books again and put them in my collection just for nostalgia's sake. But I did have other books that I still am wanting to get copies of. And the next one, number 2 on my list, is Grimm's Fairy Tales. And I remember reading these and having them read to me. And I think between like Grimm's Fairy Tales, Arthurian tales, like Disney movies, like that was where my love of fantasy began. And if you have been around my channel for any length of time, you probably know that I really like fantasy books. So it started from a really young age and it just kind of slowly had to develop. But I think with Grimm's Fairy Tales, it is a classic and read to so many kids, and they're tales that you can, I feel like, dive deeper in no matter what age you are and still get something out of it, because they have so many different themes and different things that are discussed in them as far as like morals and morally gray areas and things like that. But this will always be just a classic to me. Another classic that I know I have a copy of, but I just couldn't find it today, but that is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this, of course, is a very well-known book, but this was a book that I kind of became obsessed with when I was younger. I remember, I've talked about this before, and it's gonna age me, even though you guys already know I'm 35. But I remember borrowing the VHS tapes from the library of the BBC version, like live action version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like, I think it was a mini series. And I just remember being like, this is the coolest story ever. And so I wanted to read it. And I read that book multiple times. And it just, there's just something about it that doesn't get old. But I'm really looking forward to the new movie, the Greta Gerwig movie that's coming out, because I just can never get enough of this story, and I think it's a classic for a reason. And I need to finish reading the rest of the series so I can get the full gambit of the story. Picking 35 books means that you're going to be surrounded by piles of books, and it's a little chaotic in here. Every time I grab a book, they're all starting to fall over, so it's a little bit crazy in here. But we're going to press on. And my number 4 on this list is The Phantom Tollbooth. And this is a really special book to me because it just really opened my eyes to what writers can do to bring different things to life. And this kind of was teaching me the concept of like personification and metaphors. It's just a really unique kind of fantasy story about a little boy that is bored and goes into this kind of different dimension that's like a fantasy world, and it brings like literary concepts and math and things to life as characters, and it's just a lot of fun. It's so much fun. I think it's a classic that is underrated, and more people need to be reading this. Definitely reading it with your kids or giving your kids this book. It's definitely worth the read. Number 5 on my list is Little House on the Prairie, and I absolutely loved these books, this series. I know that Laura Ingalls Wilder, the author, kind of expanded the books as she got older, but I really loved her as like a young girl with her family. I loved the TV show as well. And I just remember living in Nebraska where it's very much like farmland and things like that, lots of cornfields. And just being at that age of like imagination and pretend and things like that, and having this kind of romanticized version of the 1800s and living on the frontier. And I was also part of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Club, which was like a monthly mail in subscription. And they would send you like crafts and recipes from that time period. And it was like paper dolls and recipes for like hotcakes and things like that. I ate it all up. I thought it was so fun. And, now as an adult, I realized that that was a really harsh and grueling life. But at the time, it was just something that I really enjoyed. But this was a special series to me because it really was about imagination and play and just kind of getting to engage that part of my brain. My next book, number 6, The Westing Game, I think was the first time where I was reading a book in school with my class and feeling like I comprehended things. And I felt like more a part of the discussion. And it was just like a really refreshing thing to be able to like comprehend and not feel as anxious. And I think because it was just like a fun mystery kind of book, it's kind of, if I recall correctly, kind of like the movie Clue, but like for kids. And I just remember it being a really fun book. And it was definitely nice, like not having all this anxiety surrounding just reading a book with my classmates. So it felt like I was more on like a level playing field with them. And number 7 is The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, which I used to have copies of. I have given them to other people, so I never got them back. But this was definitely a formative series for pubescent Amy back in the day. It just made me really value my friendships more, and it was a popular series at the time. Reading about a book that felt like you and your friends, but also getting to like the individual like heart of each character. I loved those books, and of course loved the movies and everything, but it was just something that I connected with more. And I think when you're in those like formative years of like your early teenage years, it's important to have like those things that you can connect with in order to kind of emotionally understand like where you're at, what you're going through, because the hormones are raging and everything. And just being able to find books and characters that you relate to was very significant for me. And I'm sure that everybody has had that kind of experience, whether it was a book or movie or TV show, whatever it was, there was something that helped us kind of understand the craziness going on around us and in our heads. Number 8 is a book that was very significant for me because it was, I think, my 6th grade year, and I was summer reading, and The Hobbit is the book that I picked. And it was definitely a challenge for me, but being able to get through it and read it, even with a little bit of help, I felt like so accomplished, and I remember it being just like this really cool fantasy story. And of course, my favorite part was always the riddle game between Gollum and Bilbo. But it just had such a big impact on me because it was like my first like big, more challenging book, just in general, not just fantasy, but it really did, I think, solidify a love of fantasy where I was wanting more of a challenging fantasy story. Number 9 on my list is a book that was probably significant for a lot of people, especially millennials, and that is The Outsiders. And this is such a fantastic book. Even though it does have sad and heart-wrenching moments, I think it is one that everybody should read, especially as a teenager, but just like any point of your life, I think it's one worth reading. It's an incredible story because it talks about important things such as like friendship and socioeconomic classes, empathy and loyalty, and just like retaining your humanity. There was so much addressed in those books, and if you saw the movie, it was definitely an amazing movie as well. But being able to like experience that with other people my age, reading it in class and things like that, it was like we were all kind of getting a glimpse of what the real world is like and what it's like for people who may not be as well off as we are, or people who are judged and ostracized and things like that. Just the lengths that people will go to for their friends. And there's just so many incredible messages in The Outsiders. And if you haven't read it or haven't watched the movie, you really need to go do it. Number 10 on my list is To Kill a Mockingbird. And I know that is a very popular book in school curriculums. At least it was when I was in school. I don't know about how much anymore because I think it is seen as kind of problematic with what is said as like a white savior sort of narrative to the story. For me, it was impactful because it was kind of my first introduction to books about racism and inequality. And I grew up in a predominantly white Christian community. I went to Christian schools. And so my education was a bit whitewashed. And it just was really impactful to me because I was getting to experience something that, of course, is so important. And it was like, why haven't I read things like this before? And it was just one that stuck with me because of the impact that it made on me. And I think it really did create an interest for wanting to stand up against those things. Number 11 on my list is Pride and Prejudice, and this is probably one of my favorite books of all time. I remember reading this around the time the movie came out. I remember seeing that in theaters and just kind of having my mind blown because I could kind of understand what was going on, even though it was like this older version of English. And it was like, oh, I'm smart. I can understand this. And I remember reading this, and it was another summer reading kind of thing. And I was in the UK, and I actually got to go to Bath, where Jane Austen was from, and see where she lived, and see like where they filmed some of the movie, like Darcy's house and things like that. So actually reading the book and experiencing that for the first time was like so cool and just a very formative experience for me. Speaking of formative books, 1984 was a very formative book for me. I remember reading this the same summer as Pride and Prejudice. I remember being on the plane and reading this, and it just like rocked my little 16-year-old world. I was kind of jotting down my thoughts for each book, and I said I was scared most of the time reading it, but it was so eye-opening and began my desire to oppose corrupt government. And I think it just started my understanding that the government isn't always going to protect you. They don't always have your best interest in mind, and it can even come to extremes like this. And I think that this book is extremely relevant even for today. And if you haven't read this, you really need to. It talks about anything from public surveillance to like just diminishing the individual and sense of self. And there's just so much in here. It is kind of an interesting writing style, but the more you read it and get used to it, the better it gets. And It's just one that everybody needs to read because of its relevancy. Number 13 on my list is another fantasy story that really impacted me, and that is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's a pretty short tale. It's actually considered like a literary poem, but I remember reading this in like my sophomore or junior year. I don't really recall, but I remember I had really bad bronchitis and I was making up homework, and I just kind of dived deep into this story, and I realized that I could read more challenging texts. This is like 14th century, like kind of medieval English, and again, alliterative poem, and it features Sir Gawain of King Arthur's court and his quest to uphold a deadly Christmas game he accepted from a deadly character, the Green Knight. I always loved Arthurian tales, and I think getting to read this one, which is translated from the original text, it was like getting to experience this kind of fairy tale story from when I was a kid, but at a higher level. And it was like the fantasy stories are never going to go away. It was like challenging, but it was also engaging and entertaining. And there were some really interesting messages in here. So if you haven't read it, definitely read it because it's a short read, but it also warrants some study, some like Googling, and I think you will find it very interesting. Number 14 on my list is actually a play, and that is The Laramie Project. It's a pretty short read, and this was very significant for me. I read this in college in a theater class, and it just like totally like tore up my heart. And it is about the brutal murder of a young gay man and how it affects his community. And I had not really been exposed to anything like this until I was in college, unfortunately. This really taught me empathy for the queer community. And it was just seeing that no matter who a person is or what they identify as, no one deserves to be abused or threatened or have their life taken away just because of who they are. And it's definitely a difficult read, but a very impactful one. Number 15 on my list is E. E. Cummings' poems. This is just a selected collection of some of his poems, and I read these poems and some others one summer in college, and it was just like me, like my pale self trying to tan in the backyard and reading poetry. It was a pretty good summer. I thought that reading poetry made me so like deep and intellectual, as pretentious college students tend to do. They'll find a fixation and think that they know everything. So this was kind of my era of being an intellectual like that. But in all honesty, this is such like fascinating poetry to read because E. Cummings, just his writing style is so unique and his formatting is so interesting. You know, words can be splayed all over the page. The punctuation is even significant, and it just makes you think about words and phrasing and, you know, meaning of the different things that we go through in life in a different way. Because he's talking about just life in general and love and loss. And I just found them very warm and genuine poems, even though there are some that are more heartbreaking, but definitely worth reading. And you don't have to be a pretentious college student to read them. Number 16 on my list is The Paper Magician, and this is actually a series, but it was my first book club experience. And it was not the traditional book club. It was actually a friend of my husband and I's, and he would go live and he would read books, and all of the people part of the club would be like commenting in real time, like their reactions to what was going on in the story. And it was just so much fun. I really do like miss that kind of camaraderie and experiencing a book with people. And it was just a really like fun time getting to engage with literature again with people. You know, like I think the last time you do that is like in school if you're reading aloud and things like that. But this was definitely more fun than school. But it was just cool getting to experience a book club like that. So I've kind of gone through like my school years and college and even into early adulthood. And now it's kind of more the present. And the next book, number 17, is the book that really got me back into reading as an adult. And it was really the first time that I felt like I fell in love with reading. And this was a book that I just kind of took a chance on at the library. And this book just sounded interesting to me. And it ended up becoming my favorite book, my favorite series of all time, and that is The City of Brass, or the Daevabad trilogy. And this is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy where we have a young Khan woman who is swept up into the magical world of Jinn, her kind of navigating the politics and just very much getting entrenched into the kind of complicated culture of this magical city of Daevabad. This was just so significant to me because it was like nothing else I had read. It wasn't just like medieval European based fantasy. Chakraborty, the author, is just so well researched as far as like Middle Eastern like folklore and mythology and things like that. And she really brings it to life on the page. And it's just such an incredible series, such an incredible read. If you have been around my channel or my other socials, you know that I'm obsessed with this series. I never shut up about it. It's because it just impacted me so much and really just kind of made me fall back in love with reading. And it's why I'm making videos today. So it's definitely worth the read. A book that I never see anyone talk about, but one that I fell in love with kind of early on in my adult reading journey, that is number 18, Set My Heart to Five. This is kind of a speculative fiction about an android who is a dentist and he develops human emotions. And it's not some like scary like AI taking over kind of story. It is very much just this android trying to understand the things that he's feeling and kind of the life journey that he goes on in his self exploration. It is just so unique and beautiful. You really get into the mind of a robot. It's kind of written as if you were like behind the screen in his mind and you kind of see like the analog typed out version of his thoughts and everything. And it's just really an interesting kind of writing style, but this really makes you appreciate being a human. And you never would think that an android could do that, but it did. I just really fell in love with this story. It was very impactful for me. And I think it was one of the first books that I read using the Libby app through my library. And the Libby app really has made books accessible for me because of my health. I'm not always able to leave and go to the library. I'm able to have access to books, and I'm also supporting the library through that. You know, it's more cost effective, of course, but this is kind of me advocating for Libby and for libraries because I think that without Libby, a lot of people wouldn't have access to books like me who, you know, physically can't get to the library or bookstore or whatever. I know you can buy books online and everything, but not everybody can afford to do that. And yeah, just having that accessibility is really important. So make sure that you are supporting your libraries, and you never know what you're going to find at the library. You just might find your next favorite read. As I was becoming more obsessed with reading, it kind of sparked my husband's love for reading again. So we started reading aloud together. And it has been a really cool thing to do, kind of this like bonding experience. And number 19 is one of the first books that we read together. That is Redwall, which is like a classic kind of like middle grade sort of fantasy, but I think it's great for all ages. It was just a really fun book, kind of this like sort of medieval feeling fantasy, but with like woodland creatures. You know, it's a classic. I'm sure a lot of you know about it, but we had never read it before and it still felt super nostalgic and it just made it a really fun reading experience together. Next on my list is probably one of the first cozy fantasy books that I ever read, and that is number 20, The House in the Cerulean Sea. This is such a special book. I remember reading it when I was really sick, stuck in bed, and trying to figure out what was going on with me, and it just really was like the perfect book for that time for me. This is so heartwarming, even though it does have some heartbreaking moments, but they're moments of growth. And you're literally following a orphanage that houses magical beings, and they're all so adorable and funny. They go through some difficult things, but they all are going through it together. I just can't say enough about this book. It is so heartwarming and beautiful, but absolutely hilarious at the same time. And I just really fell in love with it. I think at the time when I was reading this, I felt kind of misunderstood and different from the people, the community around me. And it just reminded me that I'm not alone and that, you know, things are going to get better. And maybe that sounds cheesy, but sometimes you just need that like spark of hope. And you never know what book will give that to you. I haven't really talked about any romance books, but number 21 on my list is a romance book, but a very unique one, and that is Me Before You. This is also a movie as well, which I believe is a very accurate adaptation. But this is about a woman who is hired as a caretaker for a paralyzed man and how they affect each other's lives. And this is pretty sad, but very meaningful. Seeing the two of them from very different walks of life be able to relate to each other and, just kind of appreciate what is important in life and, help each other see life in a different way. But it has a very sad ending. So if you've seen the movie or you read the book, you know what I'm talking about, but just go into it expecting some tears. If you've been around my YouTube or my other socials, you may know that I have a pirate fantasy obsession. I have always loved pirate stories, but reading pirate fantasy specifically is something I kind of became obsessed with after reading this series. This is Fable, or the first book of the World of the Narrows series. This is a YA fantasy series. It's kind of lower on the fantasy side, but the magic is still there. But it's like dark and gritty and fast paced. It's just a fun read. I think I ate up this series with audiobooks within like a week. It's like two books and then a prequel. I think there's another book as well that I haven't read. But this is just so much fun, and I think if you like any kind of pirate story, you definitely need to read this. I told you that my husband and I started reading books aloud together. We're literally sitting on the couch together, and it was usually me reading aloud, and we would just kind of be sitting there absorbing and reacting to the book together. But he really wanted me to read his favorite fantasy series, and that is Aragon, or The Inheritance Cycle. And getting to experience this with him was really special because it's his favorite, but it is now one of my favorites. It is like a classic feeling fantasy with dragon and dragon rider, and it just goes to this kind of epic scale. And it has just really classic elements of like different magical beings like dwarves and elves and things like that. It's also getting into like politics and war, good versus evil. There's an incredible villain in here. There's just so much goodness within this series. It was just a really special experience getting to read my husband's favorite books with him in real time. And I definitely recommend that you do that with your significant other or your friends because it's just a really great way to bond. There has definitely been a discussion within the book community that the modern literary world has become very anti-intellectual. And I don't agree with that. I think there are books out there that are written in more simple ways and maybe are more fan servicey, but there are still books out there, including fantasy books, that still have beautiful prose and unique writing styles and really just expand your mind and get you to think about the world in different ways. And The Night Circus, which is number 24 on my list, definitely did that for me. This is some of the most beautiful writing I have ever read. This kind of otherworldly atmosphere that Morgenstern, the author, creates within this magical circus. There is definitely kind of an ambiguous plot with this. This is definitely more like the atmosphere and the vibes rather than being really plot driven. But there is a like kind of through line through the story, but it's really just about kind of getting lost in the atmosphere of the circus. I think seeing that there are still writers out there who are writing beautiful prose and exploring different ways of writing, it was just really inspiring to me. And I definitely need to reread this because I know there is much more to get out of it. If you haven't read this, you definitely need to read it, but definitely know that it is more vibes than plot. When I found out that the author of my favorite series, the Daevabad trilogy, was coming out with a pirate fantasy series, I nearly lost my mind. I was freaking out, and I immediately read it whenever I got a copy of it, and that is The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. This is like pirates in the Middle East, and there's just amazing like mythology and folklore in here. Chakraborty really knocked it out of the park with this, and I am chomping at the bit for the second book, The Tapestry of Fate, which is supposed to be coming out in May. And this is just such a fun and great, like, swashbuckling kind of story. You've got really great, kind of morally gray characters, a very, like, found family with the crew, and you're following a middle-aged woman, a mother, who is captain of this crew, and just the, like and just the, like, history, mythology, folklore that Chakraborty writes into this story is so fascinating to me, and I love this book. It's, like, all of my favorite things in one. I think it was just, like, kind of learning more of my taste and what I like, and just kind of getting to love and nerd out about books. Number 26 on my list is for the high fantasy readers, and that is Assassin's Apprentice, or the first book of the Farseer trilogy. Everybody remembers their first time reading Robin Hobb because she just writes like nobody else. I think her character work is absolutely amazing. And I read this with my husband. We have been working through her Realm of the Elderlings universe. This is the first trilogy in that universe. And we just absolutely fell in love with it. It was so unique, so different. The characters are just incredible. Fitz and the Fool are probably some of my favorite characters of all time. If you haven't started your Realm of the Elderlings journey, or at least reading the Farseer trilogy, you you really need to get on that because you're absolutely missing out. Number 27 is kind of a different take on a very classic story, and that is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is basically like Sherlock Holmes and Watson in a grim, dark fantasy world. We've got weird plant magic that's killing people, and we're in this very interesting empire that's kind of trying to take over everything. I really loved this. I thought it was so much fun. After reading this book for the first time, I knew that the author, Robert Jackson Bennett, was going to be an automatic buy author, and I needed to read his backlist as well. I felt like reading this, I was kind of honing in more on my taste and just kind of learning more of what I liked as far as fantasy or just books in general. And I highly recommend this series. There is a third book coming out, I believe, in the later part of the year or early next year. This is just so much fun and has quirky characters. The Sherlock character is totally crazy, but you're absolutely going to love her. And yeah, it just goes deeper with each book, and I can't recommend it enough. Number 28 on my list, I don't have a copy of, unfortunately, but I do need to get one because I really loved this story, and that is The Girl Who Drank the Moon. This is a middle grade fantasy, but I think it appeals to all ages, like middle grade and up, because it really has some emotional depth to it. It really just blew me away how it was able to balance like whimsical magic, but also having like deep, nuanced discussions of like power and corruption. And I feel like it did it in a way that wasn't like beating you over the head with it, but it was in a way that everybody can kind of understand. And it's a book that I think you can pick apart, and definitely one that should be required reading in schools. But I think, again, all ages can enjoy this. And it's one that I definitely need to reread again because I think there's more that you can get out of it. And yeah, I just highly recommend that people of all ages read it. Number 29 on my list is very different from 28, and that is The Mask of Mirrors, or the first book of the Rook and Rose trilogy. This book solidified for me that I really love complex political fantasy, and I didn't really know that about myself, which I feel like I should have because I would gravitate towards that. But this just has so many parts to it. There's a ton of characters. The kind of like government system in here is pretty detailed and complex. And then you've got like two different kind of ambiguous magic systems as well. And then you've got people who have multiple personas that they are playing, people conning each other. There's just so many moving parts, but it was incredible. It is so, so amazing, incredible writing. The third book was a bit of a letdown for me. If you saw me in my reading journey of this, you know what I'm talking about, but overall, it's an incredible series. If you want something that is complex and entertaining and high stakes, this is definitely it. Number 30 on my list is a YA fantasy, and that is The Raybear Duology by Jordan Fuko. And this is a West African inspired fantasy, and it really is just some incredible fantasy writing. not just in the YA genre, but just all fantasy in general. It really is a great example of how diversity in fantasy is just really important, because without it, we would miss like beautiful stories and representations of different cultures. And I think Ifuko does an incredible job of representing like so many different cultures and mythology within Africa. I think with kind of a whitewashed look at Africa, a lot of cultures are kind of grouped as to be the same, or we fall into stereotypes, but there is such a rich and great variety of communities and cultures on this great continent. It's not the country of Africa, it's a continent with tons of countries and tons of communities. And I feel like this series really just represented that well. This duology is filled with grit and passion, but also a coming of age story. And I think that everybody can relate to it regardless of where you come from or what you look like, because it really is getting down to the individual and how we relate to the people around us and how we kind of grow into the person that we're going to be. And if you're one of those people that says that I can't relate to characters that don't look like me, then that's stupid and you're wrong. And you need to go read books like The Ray Bear. Number 31 on my list is another romance, which I know I don't have many of those on my list, but this was the first time I rated a romance 5 stars, and that is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. You know, romance isn't, I think, what it is stereotyped as, where it's, silly and frivolous. I think the romance genre is really important because it is teaching us about emotional intelligence. When you read a romance story, there's a lot of like healthy communication, self love, forgiveness, and healthy boundaries, and just how we are supposed to relate to other people in a healthy way. And there's a really great discussion of mental health in here as well. So I think if you're someone that writes off romance books or even like makes fun of them, you haven't read the right ones. And it also tells me more about your emotional intelligence than you may think. Number 32 on my list is a book that really surprised me because the first time I read a book by this author, I didn't really love it. And then the book I'm about to talk about, I really did love. And that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. You could read this as a standalone, but this is a trilogy. I am still working on the third book. I kind of put it on the back burner for a while, but this book showed me that even oppression that is 1,000 years old, yes, it has been going on that long, and it's ingrained into society, it still can be overthrown. And I love this book because it was just showing like even in the most bleak circumstances, there can still be hope. And of course, this is a political fantasy, which I think has already been established that I really love. But I think the themes in here are very relevant for today. And the more I'm reading fantasy, especially political fantasy, it shows me that it's not just like, you know, magic and dragons and, maybe more frivolous stories as people may think that they are. They are very relevant to today and our political climate, and there's a lot that we can learn from fantasy books. Speaking of fantasy books we can learn from, number 33, Blood Over Brighthaven, is an incredible political fantasy, but it really explores conflict to like the individual level as well. This showed me that I do like dark and devastating books. This one, it gets bleak. It gets bleak, but it is still very powerful and impactful. And this really discusses how like ignorance is not bliss. We should always be questioning the systems that are in place and who is benefiting from these systems. M.L. Wong's writing is gritty and confrontive, but very moving at the same time. And this book isn't for everybody. Not everybody enjoys it, but I think the people that do connect with it, you're going to get a lot out of this. But just knowing that I can read a bleak story like this and find it moving, I think it's very interesting to me. I never thought I would be that kind of reader, but yeah, I think it just explores really important topics. And it also reminds me that it's okay to admit that you were wrong and to change, to not be prideful, and to realize if you are a part of the problem, that it is your obligation to make the changes that you need to. And again, solidifies even more that I love a political fantasy. All right, guys, we are getting towards the end of the list. And number 34 on my list is probably going to seem out of left field, but that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And this is a classic that I think is going to be an easier one to read if you want to get back into classics or you've never read them before. And I just really enjoyed this. It really surprised me how much I enjoyed it. This book actually prompted me to want to read more classics. And I feel like I miss the classroom setting of like discussing books and kind of diving into the themes. And I was kind of dependent on that as far as like how to learn about, dissecting books and their meanings and things like that. But this showed me that I could do it on my own. And maybe that seems like obvious to you, but I think reading classics and then getting to like do my own research on them, it was kind of getting that feeling again of going deeper into a story. And yeah, I just really enjoyed that. And it prompted me reading other classics like The Picture of Dorian Gray and Frankenstein and things like that. And I definitely want to do more of that. My challenge to myself was this year, every month, I'm going to read another classic or literary fiction. I haven't been great about that, but I got the rest of the year to pick that back up. But definitely Jane Eyre is a classic that I think everyone can enjoy because of kind of just the ease of reading it as far as classics go. All right, guys, we are at 35, the last book on my list, and this kind of feels like a full circle moment. I wasn't really sure what to pick for the last book, but once I thought about this book, I knew this was the one I needed to pick, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. If you're not familiar with this is the first book of the Legendborn cycle, and this is a YA fantasy, and we're following a teenager named Bree, and she is accepted into an advanced program at the University of North Carolina. But she is quickly swept up into a magical secret society that operates like King Arthur's court. So we've got a king, we've got knights and nobles and squires, that kind of thing. I've already kind of talked about Arthurian tales and how much I loved them. And this is like taking the Arthurian legend and kind of flipping it on its head. I think what Tracy Deonn is doing in this series is really special because it's using a familiar fantasy structure of like kings and knights and nobles, and it is showing us how institutions and systems have opposition and exclusion kind of ingrained into the rules and the structure and culture. It really challenges you in a way that may be more palatable than like nonfiction or reading a history book. Even though there are a lot of fantasy elements to it, I think it is very relevant for today as we are examining more and more how racism is just very much entrenched into the systems and culture that are in place. So it's like taking some of my favorite fantasy stories and concepts and turning them on their head to have a really important discussion. I just find that fascinating, and I think more people need to read this because it'll be really eye-opening, but in a way that you're still getting an entertaining story. All right, guys, those are all 35 of my books for my 35 years. And I know it was a lot of books, so I really appreciate you indulging me and just letting me go down memory lane. I hope that you enjoyed this, and hopefully you got potentially a recommendation. And if you've read any of these books, definitely let me know what you thought about them, how they impacted you. And if there are books that impacted you like these, I definitely want to know about them. Tell me the whole story of, what age you read them and how it made you feel, what was going on. I just kind of love learning how a book impacted a person. And with all of that said, here is to year 35, and hopefully it's going to be a good one. I have high hopes for it. That is going to be it for me today, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!